I think some of the debate here is really divisive and unnecessary. Co-governance is nothing to be scared of. There are co-governance arrangements in place all over the countryside. Many of them put in place by the last national government as part of the treaty settlements process, supported unanimously across the Parliament. I think that there is an unfortunate sort of baiting that's going on at the moment that isn't going to take us forward as a country. It is using Māori as a political punching bag. I hate that style of politics. I think that political leaders should focus on bringing people together. I understand the suspicion amongst some non-Māori New Zealanders.
What is it? What is the problem? Why are they fearful?
I think that fearfulness is, if Māori are getting something, does that mean that they are missing out? My answer to that is no, it doesn't. But I think that political leaders have a responsibility to make sure they understand that by lifting up our Māori communities, by making sure that they are more involved in decisions, by making sure that we are dealing with the past grievances and that we're actually levelling the playing field. And that includes, when we say levelling the playing field, we're not just talking about today, we're talking about all of the historical things that go with that. That's actually going to make New Zealand a stronger country for everybody. And so I don't think non-Māori New Zealanders have anything to fear from that.
I mean, you touched on part of this, on the part of this question in your answer, but I just ask it anyway. And it was around the kind of the anxiety, because you mentioned earlier that hate speech and its connection with people's sense of loss and loss of identity, or their perceived sense of loss, and how one can manage that process in terms of reducing that sense of loss of whatever it might be.
Yes. Can I think it's a really important question, and I want to address it in a very specific way, and that is that I'm Pākehā. So, you know, we've had our hegemony for a very long time. It feels very uncomfortable to be challenged in certain ways, and to feel that somehow we are not going to be able to maintain our hegemony. Sorry, perhaps this is a better word, but our hegemony. So how is it that we have a discussion in which we can talk to Pākehā, with Pākehā, about how being Pākehā, what that means in a 21st century New Zealand in which te tiriti plays a more fundamental role? I'm an optimist. I would like to think that we can have that discussion by saying these are the things that you can gain. You're not losing anything, you're gaining something. And that might be very Pollyannish, but it's how you frame it. And I think we've got some wonderful people. I mean, Moana Jackson has been one of the speakers in the series. And, you know, having heard Moana on many occasions, I think that he and others are able to discuss very difficult issues in ways that are not undermining, which are affirming, even to Pākehā who need to change and might need to give up some of the things that they feel some of the things they hold very important.
But you're not talking to someone who wants to take the whole table over. You know, there are groups. My uncle Whānau would say to me, nephew, why are we partnering up? We own this country. Yeah.
So when you look at the images of Black Lives Matter, and this is an image from the Black Lives Matter protests here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. One of the most powerful elements of these images is its ability to witness, to see and to voice whiteness and its infrastructures of violence. So I see Black Lives Matter as a register for imagining strategies for disrupting the silences that are perpetuated by whiteness. So let's begin by talking about whiteness and what it is. Whiteness is the perpetuation, establishment, circulation of cultural values that are embedded in white culture and that are precisely built up in order to uphold the supremacy of white people. So in that sense, whiteness is the fundamental infrastructure of white supremacy. White supremacy thrives on whiteness, on those coded values and cultural scripts that we take as normative, but that actually reflect the entrenched values of white culture and that work to prop up and to place in positions of privilege white people. So in that sense, white culture as superior is a key element in that infrastructure of whiteness. Whiteness consistently works to put up white culture as superior, and it circulates this narrative of white culture as superior. And this sense of superiority then that is entrenched into whiteness is integral to the processes of colonization, to the occupation of the lands of indigenous peoples, to the imperial project, as well as to the project of slavery. Inherent in the narrative of whiteness is the notion of moving the beasts and the savages, which are the people from the colonized spaces and the people of Africa into the pathways of civilization, of course, through the reproduction of violence and strategies of violence. These forms of violence go all the way from rapes, murders, genocide to incarceration and the prison industrial complex. So racism in that sense emerges from whiteness, from the sense of white superiority. But racism is also a political and economic project because the devaluation of black lives, the devaluation of indigenous cultures, the devaluation of the cultures of colonized peoples, and the portrayal of these cultures as savages, as backward, as primitive, is fundamental to holding up whiteness and its superiority, and is fundamental to propelling its capitalist logics, to propelling its markets, and to propelling its use of labor as a site of exploitation. So the political economy of whiteness, therefore, depicts the ways in which the processes of colonization, slave trade are intertwined with holding up white capital. Capital, that way, is white in the sense that it holds up the nature of white culture and the supremacy of white people through both the erasure of black communities, through the erasure of indigenous communities, through the erasure of colonized communities, and through the ongoing devaluing of the cultures and the voices of the peoples of these communities. So whiteness as superiority actually works on an ongoing basis by marking blackness as primitive, by marking indigeneity as backward, by marking colonized people's cultures as savages.
Like I was just, at the protest today, people were giving speeches and then behind them is Wakefield Street, a big sign for Wakefield Street. And it's like, those are big cues that everyone sees. We're doing our best, and RNZ, thank you so much for giving us money to get the word out, and we managed to get a few 100,000 views, but millions of people see Wakefield Street every day. And so the vibe that you send out is that Wakefield was a pretty fine guy, presumably, because I've met my counselors and stuff, and they're nice people and they're rational. So if it was really that bad, we surely would have changed the name, I assume. You know, it's like all of these codes all the time that are just sending to people it probably wasn't that bad. So I think just like, obviously, this is just, you know, to people like me who have an opportunity to talk about things, obviously keep shouting as much as you can. But I think it's just like part of it is like there is so much out there that is undermining all of that good work, that is just making, you know, that is the stuff that people see all the time that sends a general vibe that the colonization of New Zealand wasn't that bad, and that the, you know, that it don't worry about it and don't think about it. And I think just also really quickly, another thing that I think I learned from putting out a history web series and seeing the reaction to that, and I think it again goes back to something that Jade was saying about like having a clear utopian vision. I think like a lot of Pākehā viewers of our show had no concept of what that might be, or had never thought, oh, what might that look like? There's like a really, and including me, I think, going through that process as well of like, I think just like a really tiny thing from a comedy sketch, because that's what I do. There was like a comment someone made, just, you know, your normal kind of racist comment that was about the sketches that Captain Cook is pitching civilization to a panel of Māori investors, and then the Māori investors are like, oh, we've already got a civilization, so oh, no thank you. And one of the comments was just about, oh, you know, they're wearing contemporary like Pākehā clothes, so, you know, like, so what's that about? You know, and like obviously it doesn't make any sense at all. But I think what it reveals as well is like this sense of no thought of like that there is a preferable alternate world where colonization didn't happen, and that Māori were able to just like continue living their lives and having their culture and developing and like exploring the world and developing their own trade relationships and, you know, all of the great things that have started to happen pre-colonization. And there's no sense of, oh, I wonder what, you know, the Māori relationship with the UN would have been, or how they would have handled the world wars, or like, you know, what tikanga would be around land now that might be a beacon to other countries. And there's no sense of that little comment about like, they're wearing suits, just kind of revealed to me this idea that like there's been no effort to imagine an alternative to just continuing to live in the society we live in now, that's been built by years of like oppressive and violent colonization. And I think just like, yeah, I mean, in terms of all of the work that everyone's doing, I think it's all connected in that the only way that I think a lot of people are going to be able to imagine that better alternative is if, you know, more people remove the obstacles to allow people to demonstrate that. And then it's our job as people in the media to then amplify those stories and put them out there so that people go, oh, that's what it looks like. I haven't had much time to imagine it, but that looks pretty good. And like more of that is probably good.
Welcome along to episode 4 of Minds of Giants. I have with me distinguished Professor Paul Spoonley from Massey University. You are I've gone through and after a quick Google search got in your various accolades.
Yes.
So you're the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences.
I am.
You've led various externally funded research programs, written and edited over 20 books, worked at various tertiary institutes around the world, including Berkeley in California.
Yes.
And you often appear in the news media, whether TV, radio, or in articles talking about various things. Most of what I could find seemed to be related to immigration and sort of the idea of the family unit in New Zealand.
Well, mainly because we've had incredibly high levels of immigration since 2012.
Yeah.
So it's been top of mind for,
of course,
the media. So that's why it's been particularly obvious in the sort of last 5 or 6 years.
Cool. Well, exactly sort of what I was looking to talk to you about first is, well, actually, so you would class yourself as a sociologist?
I am a sociologist. I trained originally as a geographer and a sociologist.
Okay.
But I went to the UK and did a Master of Science in Race Relations at Bristol. And so that moved me into sociology. So when I was appointed here at Massey University in 79, I was appointed as a sociologist. So I am a sociologist.
Cool. What piqued your interest in that initially?
It was a mixture of being interested in the social and what people did and how they did it.
Yeah.
But it was also a series of quite serendipitous events.
Yeah.
So one of the things I did in the UK was I did this program, Masters in Race Relations, and I had to do 3 papers.
Yeah.
And then I had to do a dissertation. And I had 2 events happened in quite a short period.
Yeah.
One was a young Pakistani was held down and a swastika carved in his stomach with a razor blade near where I lived in Bristol. And the other one was an Indian woman answered the door of her house in Birmingham in the UK, and the young National Party, nothing to do with our National Party, but the young National Party in the UK set her alight. Poured petrol over the Surrey and set her alight. And I was the son of a migrant from Liverpool.
Yeah.
And I'd always imagined Britain being this bastion of liberal democracy.
Yeah.
And that wasn't what I was experiencing. And so that piqued my interest. And it's those sorts of events, and there's been a series of them, which have encouraged me to say, well, why? Why are people acting like that? What makes them want to act like that? What beliefs underpin what they do?
Absolute masterpiece, 1975, Sociobiology by E.O. Wilson, is a true Bible because it goes through an explanation of how you study social behavior from, as I said, a biological basis. Now, that book became unbelievably controversial because in the last chapter, and I think it was chapter 26, he applies the sociobiological framework to study human behavior, and hence this is known as human sociobiology. And so this is exactly what I talk about when I discuss the human reticence effect. It's perfectly okay to apply evolutionary principles to explain 1,999,999 species, but if you apply it to study one species called humans, well, then you are Himmler and you're a Nazi. And so E.O. Wilson, in daring to apply incredibly rigorous and profound evolutionary principles to explain incredible animal behavior, including some very puzzling animal behavior, once he used that framework to apply it to human behavior, then he was a persona non grata, which of course is exactly what you see 45 years later with evolutionary psychologists. If you apply a principle to study the evolution of mating behavior of the salamander, then you're a great scientist. If you apply the exact same mechanism, the same methodology, the same epistemology to study the evolution of human mating in humans, well then come on, that's just faux science. It's Nazi science. It's pseudoscience. Incredible book. If you want to see the origins of the culture wars, remember, I often talk about that. What led me, the genesis of when I wrote The Parasitic Mind, is when I first, in my scientific career, 25 plus years ago, when I was trying to introduce evolutionary psychology into the business school, into the study of psychology of decision making, into the study of consumer psychology, into the study of marketing in general, I faced a lot of resistance, right? People didn't like the idea of applying biology and evolution to the study of consumers and managers and financial traders. What are you talking about, Dr. Saad? This is not a biology department. Well, E.O. Wilson faced this in the 70s because remember I told you about his sociobiology book. Well, of course, he's saying that, of course, humans are driven by biological and evolutionary imperatives. Well, his colleagues at Harvard, some of whom were themselves evolutionists, like the late Stephen Jay Gould and Richard Lewontin, they were Marxists, so they felt that the application of evolutionary thinking to human behavior did not fit their Marxist ideologies. Hence, they were parasitized. So you see where the origins of me seeing this parasitic thinking came way before the woke stuff. It started off in my scientific career, and later that I see the war on reason, infiltrating every nook and cranny in academia. Well, this book traces in a really beautiful kind of historical narrative all of the stuff that E.O. Wilson faced at Harvard, with the famous case where a bucket of ice water was thrown on him, where he had to go around campus with police protection. And so he was one of the original OGs against all the woke stuff. So when you think about Thomas Sowell fighting the feminists in the 60s and 70s, E.O. Wilson is fighting all of this, tribal, parasitic, ideological garbage within academia.
Fascinating. Wow. Oh, okay. So that brought you, and then eventually you ended up, like you said, coming from the UK over to here.
Yep.
Why here?
I was based in Auckland. Massey was going through a major growth spurt in the 70s.
Okay.
Needed sociologists, and they were moving from appointing sociologists from overseas to appointing local sociologists. So in that year, Steve Mahari and I were appointed to sociology here as part of that both growth of sociology, but the sort of indigenisation, meaning New Zealandness, not tangata whenua, but the New Zealandness of sociology. And then, of course, again, one of those events that prompted my interest and Steve's interest was quite soon after we had the Springbok Rugby Tour.
Oh, true.
And it split the society in ways that were very profound and quite difficult to understand now, but it was about racism.
Yeah.
It was about the role of tangata whenua, it was about rugby, and it was about national identity.
So at Whenua Taurikura, we are here to identify the priorities and to identify the gaps and to help fund and develop that research. That is our role. But after more than 40 years of working in this space, I thought I knew quite a bit about extremism in this country. I thought I knew about some of the social economic drivers, and I thought I knew about the people who were attracted to and who would become activists. And in March 2019, I realised I didn't. And I was disabused of, I guess, my own arrogance that I knew. The violence, hate, and terrorism of that March day highlighted how little I really knew. I had begun to pay more attention to the online ecosystem and to its increasingly racist, Islamophobic, anti-Semitic, misogynistic content and its influence. But I didn't really understand the extent of that ecosystem. I wish I'd done more to challenge those around me and the agencies, and to say that there was a threat, an ever-present threat. But what I hope, if anything good comes out of March 2019, is that we have disturbed the complacency of New Zealanders.